and now is even in our own community. So I am thankful to have with me Pastor Reginald Walton. Pastor Walton is the pastor of Phillips Memorial CME Church. He serves on the Human Relations Commission with the City of Phoenix. He is the chair of the Civic Engagement section of the AACCC. He is an activist as well. I also have Roy Tatum with me. Roy is the president of the East Valley NAACP. He has worked on major political campaigns and even on Capitol Hill, and he is currently a delegate to the Democratic National Convention. And we also have the face most of you recognize, our own senior pastor. Pastor Stewart is on the governor's faith-based committee for the 2020 census. He is also on the Mayor's African American Advisory Council. He is a civil rights leader, and I am just excited to have three of the loudest voices in our community as it relates to activism and civil rights and all of that. So greetings, gentlemen. I am so glad to have all of you with me today.
Amen. Thank you.
Greetings. Honored to be here.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
Wonderful, wonderful. I really want to talk about 3 Ps. The 3 Ps, I'm a preacher too. Sorry, Roy. You got 3 preachers on here.
Roy's a jackleg preacher.
Oh. All right,
I was just about to say.
4 preachers. I want to talk about the police. I want to talk about the protests, and I want to talk about politics. Because you cannot talk about the first 2 without landing on the last one, because eventually it's going to have to be legislation that makes a major difference in the country. So let's talk first about policing. Well, before I get there, as African-American men, I really am curious as to how each of you are doing in light of everything that's going on. African-American women, our hearts bleed for everything that has been happening and how it affects African-American men especially. So how are each of you doing in light of everything? We'll start with you, Pastor Walton.
Thank you so much for the question. I'm holding, and what I mean by that, I'm holding the trauma, the repeated trauma that we've witnessed over and over again. I had to unplug. I had to back away and say, you know what, I cannot do this. Someone tagged me after I had been tagged some 40 times watching the video of Brother Floyd there in Minneapolis. And I finally just had enough, and I said, you know, while I understand the intent, why don't you tag those that aren't doing anything? The people you've tagged are the ones that are doing the work. Tag those down at the legislature, tag the governor, tag the police unions, and see what they have to say about the issue. It was very telling that this person got offended by me just saying, I'm hurting, and right now I cannot take anymore. And so I appreciate you giving us space to articulate our feelings, because oftentimes we, in particular as Black men, are told not to express our feelings. We, in particular as Black men, have been conditioned to say that emoting or sharing your emotions is not a good thing. And so I'm come to the place where I'm not going to hold it anymore. If I need to weep, I'm going to weep. If I need to holler, I'm going to holler, because that is what is keeping me sane, that and the Lord.
Amen. Amen. Roy, how are you?
I am, I would say, doing well as could be expected. In this day and time, of pandemic, Black people in America have been born into a pandemic. The pandemic of racism, the pandemic of disenfranchisement, the pandemic of murder. When someone gets ready to take a life or a Black life or a Black body and do what they wanted to do to it, there was always very little penalty for crimes committed against us. And so we have come to know America from a very different space and lens, as many of those who may immigrate, who willfully immigrate here from other spaces. So this is not a shock to me because I've been working in the reality of America for a very long time. And the thing that I'm actually optimistic right now. And someone would say, well, how are you optimistic? I'm optimistic at the point that now children, white, Black, Latina, Asian, Arab, are challenging everything, challenging our parents, challenging the police, challenging the politicians, challenging us. And now I'm saying, now it's your turn to lead. It is your turn to let your voice be heard. I'm 44. I know I may be the baby on this panel, but at 44, we're talking about Martin Luther King didn't make it past 39. Malcolm X didn't make it past 39. Medgar Evers, 38 or 39 himself. Many of our iconic civil rights leaders did not make it past the age of 40, but begin to lead in their late 20s, early 30s. So I'm recognizing the time and looking to see which new leaders I can help develop, groom, mold. I want to be out of the way because I'm not going to be one of the people that prevent the new generation of leaders from taking over. Now, I'm happy to give guidance. I'm happy to give direction. So I'm optimistic about those that can't take it anymore and sit on the sidelines and be quiet. I told some people, I said, we still organizing from the last protest. You know, many of us were protesting in 2014 and when Romaine Brisbane was shot, when Michelle Crusoe was killed by the police. Right. We were organizing when the police held Drayvon Ames and his wife, Aisha, at gunpoint over a doll baby, and we filled up Pilgrim Rest Baptist Church. We've been organizing. The organizing hasn't been loud and in the streets, but we've been organizing. We've been meeting. We've been working. And this group of people that you have assembled have been consistently in the work when the cameras were not rolling. So I am optimistic about the next generation that is now ready. They've shown up. They're showing up. Now you're ready to take. You really want to get into this work. Let's go.
All right. Thank you. Pastor Stewart,
thank you.
How are you? I know you said in your press conference yesterday that you've been crying for 3 days. So how are you now?
Good morning to all of you and good day to the viewers who were there. I'm doing okay. I've turned the corner, and I'm not going to be nice anymore to white politicians. I've worked with them. I read an article from one of the news feeds this morning, and it said, what are the Arizona leaders saying about the murder of Gregory Floyd? The only Arizona leader who publicly spoke about Mr. Floyd is Chief Jerry Williams, who is an African-American woman. Now, the mayor of Phoenix sent out a statement. They contacted the governor's office. He has not responded. I got an email from the assistant to the Attorney General of Arizona, Mr. Brnovich, said, Attorney General Brnovich wanted to check on you, and I wrote him back. I said, until white people, white men and women in power, begin to address the systemic racism that is in the justice system, I said, talk isn't even cheap because you're not even talking. So I am no longer Mr. Nice Guy, because watching Mr. George Floyd be murdered, be executed, I'm done. I'm done. I was just on a call with a mayor of one of the valleys. A pastor friend asked me to talk to him. He said, "I'd like to get a group of you African American leaders." I said, "No, no." I said, "You get all of the mayors of the Valley of the Sun and invite the governor. You white people in power, you address it. You respond to it. You don't need to call another meeting of black people." So I am done with being nice when it comes to this.
All right. Well, thank you each. Glad to hear how you are doing and where you are. And I don't think anybody listening would disagree with where you are, because I think you all have articulated where many of us are. And we're all in the different stages. I did a little research this morning. And as we move into the subject of talking about the police, and on there's a website that maps police violence. And on that particular website, even though it is not just reflective of police violence against African Americans, it's police violence in general, it indicates that violence against people of color is 3 times higher than any other race. It says 99% of killings by police from 2013 to 2019 have not resulted in officers being charged with a crime. 99%. We recognize that with the murder of George Floyd, and we can all say that with great confidence that it was murder from our viewpoint. We know that he has been arrested. He has been charged, 3rd-degree murder. There's lots of debate about whether or not that is enough, but that's what it is for right now. But we've seen arrests. We're thankful that we're getting arrests. We've seen them go to trial. We don't see them get convicted. What about this? And it seems like we're angry for a moment in time, but we find ourselves back here. What do we say about these police officers who do commit these crimes and they do not serve any time for them?
That's the system. What do you mean? What, ain't nothing to say about that. That's been done for 400 years in America. I mean, what is there to say about it? You just said it, 99%. Do you expect a cop to go to jail for killing a person? No. All they have to say is, "I feared for my life." But that white cop who killed George, he wasn't fearing for his life. And so now if that sucker gets off,
we can all say
they need to burn every city down.
Well, and it sends a message. It sends a message clear. There've been since Rodney King, I believe. For many of us, I came into wanting to organize and beginning to organize at 15 around Rodney King, 1991. And when many of us articulated say, okay, we finally got it. This is before cell phone cameras. This is before videos on every corner. A pedestrian pulled out their camera and recorded the police repeatedly beating Rodney King. And many of us said, they finally, this is what we've been talking about. And they finally got it on tape. And when we saw the ability of this jury, because they moved to the Simi Valley, it was all white, we get that. But we should have known. We know that white people, white jurors can watch the police repeatedly beat, brutalize, and even kill a black body and say that was justified. They don't care about us.
So here's where I think that we have to marry the question of policing and politics. Okay. Because you look at the hesitation of the district attorney to bring charges and say, and you see it over and over, where we don't want to overcharge. because we need to look at the evidence. And then you start to see the spin. It doesn't matter what was going on before someone is brought into custody, because you see over and over, people have gone into movie theaters and slaughtered people by the dozen. People have gone into churches and slaughtered folk. And when they get arrested, there's no brutality. When they get brought into the system, there's no question of the charges. And so we have to go into the policing aspect of it, but we also have to go into the political aspect of it. It's said that close to 90% of county attorneys or district attorneys across this country run unopposed. We've got to change that. We also have to change the way in which legislatures come in and say, oh, well, this charge is for civilians. And you see that there are, I know in Arizona a couple of years ago, and I believe even this session, there was a bill introduced that would have protected law enforcement from any kind of that would have protected law enforcement from any kind of legal ramifications for what they did on the job. Lastly, what I would suggest is that we also have to take a look at overturning cases that have been that set the standard. I believe it's Graham versus Connor, and there's another one, someone versus Tennessee, that set the standard that whenever a law enforcement officer takes a life, this is the script that you will hear. I feared for my life.
Fear for my life.
Fear for my life. So it's not about police training. There's nothing about police training that we should be trying to get changed. Shooting first and asking questions later.
Well, I think this past week in Phoenix, Arizona, we saw what proactive, transparent leadership of a police department will do. I believe Chief Jerry Williams has been doing the best she can in getting the Phoenix police not to react, but to simply do their job. When I saw the guy the other night take his skateboard and break out the back of the police squad car, and 4 police jumped out. They did not jump out with their hands on their guns. They jumped out like this, wanted to see what was going on. They moved the crowd back to some degree and put on their shields. That, to me, is an example of how when police are trained properly, they don't react, they respond, and they respond taking the whole situation. I mean, if somebody broke out the back of my car, I don't know if I would jump out and not come out swinging, but they didn't. So to me, I think our own Chief Jerry Williams is an example of what effective police training, and we even met with her yesterday on Friday, and she said even after all of what happened the other night and her police were restrained until people started damaging property, she said, but still, I can't guarantee you that the Phoenix police are going to be right 100% of the time. So with her transparency and proactivity, I think we have an example right here in the Valley of the Sun.
All right.
I would also suggest that the training module, one of the things that you're starting to see, and it came out of the President Obama's 21st Century Policing report, that I suggest that anybody that wants to get involved in social justice work, and in particular with police reform or criminal justice reform, you need to do a quick study of that. But one of the things that you're seeing out of that is that you're seeing that more departments and more law enforcement agencies are putting together implicit bias training. And that it's helping people to see, hey, I may have biases and I need to address them and tackle them head on.
What about police unions? What can the public do about these police unions that seem to turn a blind eye to bad police officers?
The thing about the police unions it's just what it is. It's a union to protect those in law enforcement, and that is organized. There's organized messaging. There's organized money to provide legal fees, and so the thing is, it's about organizing. I believe Kwame Ture, former Stephen Carmichael, said we're not outmanned or we're not outnumbered. We're out organized. And the police organizing to protect themselves and their narrative, regardless. I mean, even I've said this before. Even your mama, a black mama, will admit when her child is wrong. The police union will never admit
right
to wrong, even when evidence speaks to it. And so the thing is, we've got to have just as much organization as they have. We've got to have resources just like they have, and we've got to have fearless lawyers that can't be intimidated by the police or the police union when it's time to pursue them in court.
All right. It's interesting because you say that policing and politics go together. I think you, Pastor Walton, was the one who kind of drew the line for us. And the comment has been made from you, Roy, that we want to pass the baton, for lack of a better word, to these younger organizers and younger protesters. And where are these leaders? When I look at the protests as we move kind of shift between all of these topics, when I look at the protests in Phoenix, I see young people. They are passionate about what is going on, and they really look like they need direction. We know of some young organizers who are out there taking leadership, but then everything kind of disintegrates at the end, and they're out there till wee hours of the morning. And this is not to disparage their efforts, because I believe their efforts and their intentions are good. But what is happening in these protests that we find the next day we're talking about the looting and we're not talking about why they were out there? What's happening? Where's the disconnect?
So one of the things that I believe is happening, I was speaking to some friends in various cities across the country, and the protests for the most part begin peacefully.
Yeah.
However, somewhere along the lines, the protests become infiltrated, and there are people who are not affiliated with the group that organized, and they begin to turn the tide, meaning that what was peaceful chants, no justice, no peace, now become incendiary with the F the police. Mm-hmm. Not only that, but you're starting to see that people will start to damage property and incite others. Come on, man, and damage this property. And a lot of leaders are saying, we don't know who these people are. These people are coming in from the outside, and they're beginning to damage property. From the law enforcement perspective, they see a group, yeah. And if the group is now the ones that are the aggressors, and instead of being able to say, "Hey, look, I see a portion of this group that is being aggressive and being damaging property," now it's the entire group is the enemy, and so that's where you start seeing the dispersion of rubber bullets. That's when you start seeing the release of tear gas onto the crowd, because people are infiltrating, and it's sad, but I do believe that, like Roy Tatum said, we do have the opportunity for new leaders to come up. I'm proud here in the city of Phoenix, Reverend Radeem Robinson is doing a marvelous job of being there and being active and bringing, I'll even go here, cleaning up the mess of those who have drop the ball when it comes to leadership and keeping order in protests.
Pastor Stewart.
Let me also respond to that. I remember at Bishop College taking a philosophy class. I do not remember the philosopher, but I remember the statement: the crowd has no hands. And what happens as a mentality when you're in a crowd, that you lose your individuality. So depending on the loudest voices in the crowd, they can motivate the crowd to be productive. They can motivate the crowd to be destructive. But in a crowd, like I said, the crowd has no hands. And the leadership is very important. And you talked about the young people. Well, if you look at the civil rights movement, the people out there with Dr. King, Dr. King was young, but the people with him were young people. They were high school students, they were college students. And I think many of the greater civil rights movements in the United States of America, yes, they've had leaders who were older in many cases and leaders who were younger, but it was young people. They have the energy, they have the passion, but also they don't have the experience or the discipline. So that's why the leadership is extremely important. We heard from several sources that when they had the damaging riot down at the state capitol in front of the police, that one of the leaders was seen when it got rowdy, get it into a cab and leaving. He took them out there and allegedly led them and riled them up. And when they started damaging property, he got in a cab and left. What kind of leadership is that?
Can't do that. I would say, if I can just chime in real quick on this point, whenever, and this is for those that may be watching, social justice, those that may want to start in social justice, has to have a start point and a stop point or end point. And this is the importance of the Black church or any of our churches for that matter, because most of our protests throughout history started at church and they ended up back at the church at the conclusion of the protest. So you can't have a rally or you can't have a protest with a start point and no end point, because that right there allows for those that want to create anarchy the cover of your protest to do what they're going to do. So when you have a start point and an end point, you know, if we say, okay, we're going to start at 8 o'clock and we're going to be back at the church at 10 o'clock, at 10:01, anybody that's not back at the church ain't with us.
Got it.
I mean, you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so that covers you as the leader, our organizations. So for those in our organization, whether it's the NAACP, the Urban League, the churches, pastors, our group say, hey, our group started at 8 o'clock. We were back at our place by 10 o'clock. If this happened at 10:05, that wasn't us, because here's where we were, because we had an endpoint. So I just want to put that on there.
And that is a wonderful point to make, because I think a lot of people who are going out to these protests don't realize that they may not have organization. I was watching on live stream, Facebook Live, and somebody was filming one of the organizers next to Redeem, and she was saying, "We are done. This is the last statement. And anything that happens after this is not us, because we are done." And I assume that they finished up whatever protest that they were doing last night. And the crowd that remained was there under their own demise. So I appreciate that point. Pastor Walton, you had something else you wanted to share.
And another thing about leadership, I would urge, if you are new to this, if you are new in this space, and this has finally gotten you to where you want to hit the street, I would urge you to research who is leading these marches. Do the research. because everyone is not credible. You have people that have a history of leading people out into dangerous situations and then jumping into a cab and leaving. And so I would suggest that you take the time, get with somebody. If you don't know who it is, please you can look online. You can look and call somebody up. Call the NAACP. Call Dr. Stewart. Call me. Call Mr. Tatum and find out who is leading these marches. Because unfortunately, there are some people that are leading these marches for the wrong reasons, and ultimately to lead up to clashes with law enforcement.
I appreciate that, but I will say this. It is obvious that there is a crowd of people who desire to do something. They want their voice heard. They recognize the injustice, not just of George Floyd, because the people in Arizona are also protesting because of Deion Johnson. And we have no answers, nothing, no information. There was no body camera on the DPS officer. And so we know that Deion Johnson is dead and we have no answers. So, the list didn't stop at George Floyd. It continues in Arizona. They want to be heard that this cannot continue. But I don't hear of any other organized marches. I've heard that there is another march tonight. It is still by some leaders that don't have a reputation for doing protests in a way that is beneficial to the people or to the protest. So where's everybody else? Where's the NAACP? Where's the Black Church? Where are these other protests march? Or are there so many that we're just missing in the fray?
Well, the Black Church, I can't speak for the whole Black Church, but I can speak for the African American Christian Clergy Coalition. We are very present, but that doesn't mean we're always in front of the TV. That doesn't mean we always call in a press conference. That doesn't mean that we are down at the marches. I try to follow Dr. King's strategy, the civil rights strategy. When trying to get something from the powers that be, first of all, you try to negotiate. You state your case. If that doesn't work, the next step Dr. King used, he would get the information out to the public to try to broaden his base of support, to get more people in line. So it wasn't just him and his leadership talking. I'm representing thousands and thousands of people. Then if that didn't work, then they went to the marches, nonviolent marches. And then when that didn't work, they moved to boycotts. And finally, when that didn't work, they moved to civil disobedience. So there are stages that you take in trying to get your message across. So the African American Christian Clergy Coalition, we have been meeting, I thank God for this, but you remember this time last year, all of you on the call remember how that young couple, African American couple, was misused, abused by a police officer and was caught on video. We labored, we worked, we had our mass meeting, we talked to the mayor, we talked to the chief, but then we worked for months and all three of our demands. One, we had been working on for 20 to 30 years, a civilian review board.
That's correct.
All three of our demands. One, have training for your officers so to do a community survey so we see what all segments of the community think about the police. Two, come up with a system to weed out bad cops. And three, civilian review board. In less than a year, because of negotiations, because of going through the city council, because of making phone calls to the city council and to other business people saying, tell them this, we were able to achieve something that has never been achieved in Phoenix in the 43 years I've been here. So I believe in the marches and stuff. I mean, we did that for the King holiday. But as I said yesterday, none of that moved the powers that be until we hit their pocketbook. And so these protests are fine. I really wish that professional athletes and others who believe in liberty and justice for all, if they were to boycott professional sports, I guarantee you, the government leaders and the business people would fix this issue. And I don't have any contact with athletes. Maybe Roy, you do, whatever. They ain't playing as it is now, most of them. But if they were to call for a boycott, brother, from Trump on up, we would be trying to do something.
Well, let me ask a question. Let me ask a question before you jump in there. I am curious, as much as I appreciate you giving an outline of a path to changing things and the fact that AACCC has been in negotiations, and I'm certain that other organizations have been working throughout the country to move our plight forward. What is the ask? King was, you know, there were bills and legislation, and it was very clear what the ask was. What is the ask in all of this? Is the ask?
Get your doggone foot off my neck.
Okay, but what does that mean? What does that mean? Get your foot off my neck? Because we can't assume. You've got a plethora of persons that are not of color who will say, but I don't have my foot on your neck. So what does that mean tangibly to systemic racism? What does that mean? What is the ask?
It means we want to be treated like human beings when we encounter the police. It means that we want you, we expect or demand that we be treated the same as those that you've taken into custody without using violence. We've seen police officers apprehend armed suspects with no shots fired. We've seen police apprehend those who have committed mass murder, and they've taken them to Burger King. We've seen it. We know that they can do it. Even over the course of this weekend, this week, we've seen people throw rocks, bottles, bricks at the police, and they did not reach for their gun. So that means they have the capacity. And that the police not kill us. They're not saying, hey, if somebody commits a crime, you do your job. We're not telling you to not do your job. But your job is not to be judge, jury, and executioner on the streets, because and you can't expect for us to continue peaceful resolution, or you can't expect for us to tell people to remain calm when we clearly see that you have no regard for our human life. And your question of where's the NAACP? NAACP, I've been doing my best to follow the guidelines nationally, it's according to our chain of command, because I just represent the little old East Valley out here. That's what I've been reminded of sometimes. So I do my best to not overstep. Now, having said that, I understand that my voice does carry out throughout the state of Arizona and in some other spaces. But I also want to say that I try my best to follow the rules and the protocols of the national guidelines put forth by the NAACP. Now, having said that, the NAACP is a all volunteer organization. I need to remind some people that paid in this position. and there's not a payroll here. So any resources extended to do the work of the NAACP usually comes out of my household's pocket. So there's it's just when the people want and demand certain organizations to do certain things. However, they've not invested. It's hard to do all the things that the people want when there's been no public investment. That's all I'm gonna say about that.
All right. Pastor Walton, you held up a book for a moment ago, so it sounds like you might have something to say.
So demands are more than just for the police. Okay. Demands are for business. Demands, I held up this book, The Color of Law, by that chronicles the history of redlining in America, of how the government actually created segregated communities in this country. So one of the demands needs to be equal access, not only to housing, equal access to education, equal access to homes where I'm localized for my zip code, equal access to healthcare. And then when it comes to the justice system, we want it to be the justice system and not the just us system. There are several lists of demands. I believe that theologian Peter Paris in the 1960s and 70s came up with the Black Manifesto. And so I would just go and take a look at it. If it was written in the 70s, that means it's 40, almost 50 years old. And so I think we need to take a look at bringing us together and saying, okay, what do we want? I want to be able to go and enjoy life without the harassment or the thought in the back of my head that if I have an encounter with law enforcement, am I going to make it home? My brother wrote an article for the San Jose Mercury News entitled "Driving While Black," and he wrote that article over 20 years ago in the 90s, and those principles still apply today. And he began with wondering, when I start my car, am I going to have an encounter with law enforcement that is going to cause me harm, or that is going to cause me not to be able to come home? And so I think that we need to take a look at that. We need to really articulate our demands and really listen to not only what the typical voices have said, but to listen to this new generation that's coming along as well.
I think the new generation's voice is coming out, and I think some of that is coming out in some of the protests. I had the opportunity to listen to a young activist, a young African-American activist in Minnesota. They filmed her, I believe it was last night, might have been the night before, I only saw it today. And she was talking about the burning of Target. So I'm assuming it was in Minnesota. And her point was that these businesses don't come to African-Americans' aid. So there was no remorse in the fact that these establishments were targeted and were burned down. And even you, Pastor Stewart, made mention of, burning things down. I don't know if you meant it literally as much as you might have meant it figuratively, but it is words that you said not only in the press conference, but you've said it in this opportunity here. And you said a boycott. When young people start targeting businesses because they feel that the businesses have neglected the African-American community, they are targeting dollars. They are. So why do we frown on some of those actions?
Well, but the challenge I've talked to two people in the last 2 days from Minnesota. Mm-hmm. And the target there and some of those stores were in predominantly African-American communities. And so they're saying now the senior citizens who live in those neighborhoods have nowhere to buy groceries. They can't go outside. You mentioned the word target, so let's use the word law. Let's targeting. Target who we're going to target. One, what I said a while ago about all the cities burn, that was hyperbole.
Okay.
I don't want anybody to take that literally, because I am an advocate of nonviolence. But what I said, why I said what I said, is that if they let this guy off, I mean, the people, the people, I mean, I wouldn't blame if every city, I wouldn't blame the people who start setting every city afire. If they let this guy off, hundreds of millions of people have seen that police officer kill a man. So back to the point, targeting, even in the Los Angeles riots after Rodney King, and even when Dr. King was killed. But it goes back to what one of you said about segregation, Pastor Walter. I guess because they segregate us and we really don't have access to the white community, so we burn what's closest to us.
Well, stop right there, Pastor Stewart, because I want to read something that Breonna Parker, one of your daughters in the ministry, wrote on Facebook today. She said, regarding these young people and the places that they have looted. She said, my mama always taught me that looters and riots don't usually destroy their own, in quotes, communities, because their own communities, because the majority of the community is not owned by them. You want people who are essentially leasing every moment of their day, from their residences to their jobs to public transportation to convenience stores where there should be grocery stores, to take ownership and protect what? For whom? Tell me something new, because this ain't. So it seems like the mentality and the thoughts of younger protesters are very different. You just said it. You know, with redlining, these may be our communities, but we're not owners in these communities. So maybe our affinity to them may not be the same because they are younger. They see it very, very different.
The most significant protest I have seen in Minneapolis was when the brothers and sisters went to that cop's house. Mm-hmm. They went to his house. They went to his neighborhood. They did not burn anything. They wrote on his driveway, "A murderer lives here." They protested outside. They went to the perpetrator. Mm-hmm. I wish the people that are burning our own community, whoever is the owner of it, I wish they would go to the perpetrators' neighborhoods more than burning our own neighborhood, even though white people own and non-white people own most of those stores. But I also saw where a young brother was crying. He and his wife, they had just started this year a brand new, I don't know if it was a bar, but it was some kind of place where people could come and eat. And he said, we put our life savings in. And she said, when they came in, we said, look, this is ours. Why are you burning my establishment? And they went ahead and burned it. So this young Black couple have lost their life savings because the crowd has no hands mentality. When they even knew it was owned by a Black person, they burn it down anyway.
Okay.
A lack of connection amongst us, and once again, if you don't have a starting and stopping point, if you don't have those spiritual boundaries or guidelines guiding you, then it's an anything goes mentality, and then therefore it turns the protest into a mob mentality, because we are together to combat and protest police brutality. And we do have the eyes of the world on our communities. And unfortunately, we know that the media will focus on the reaction and not the root cause of the action. And so our job, I believe our job is to make sure that we continue to remind the powers that be, the media, the politicians, the leaders in law enforcement, that the reason that this is happening is because of the actions of the police officers.
Very well said. Very well said. I appreciate that. Even having personal boundaries will help you. Yeah. Pastor Walton, were you getting ready to say something?
I was simply getting ready to say one of the things that was powerful about the civil rights movement of the 1960s, 50s, 60s, is that Fisk University created a school for nonviolence. One of the things you also saw is that I know in Birmingham, the churches got together and trained the children and the youth to be nonviolent. I think that one of the things that we're seeing now is the attitude that this is not my grandmother's civil rights movement, and so that we don't care. And that mentality, I don't understand how you can say that I'm making a difference when I'm just destroying property. I don't understand how you can say I'm making a difference when there is no, and to Mr. Tatum's point, the relationships in the community, a lot of business owners are not a part of the community anymore. And so you have what's this outsider mentality that says you're not from this neighborhood, you're not one of us, and so we don't care who you are and who's what you have going on.
Pastor Stewart.
But the one difference, and thank you, Pastor, the one difference that Brother Roy has brought up, this younger generation does not have the connection with the church.
Yeah.
Martin King's civil rights movement and all before that, there was a connection with the church, and what I do, I believe is God work. The fact that I support Jesus and justice, that's ministry.
Yes.
But remember, from the boomers to you all's generation, the Generation Xers, there's been a disconnect. And then this next generation is your children, and the church don't mean nothing to them. And so they don't have the spiritual undergirding that the civil rights movement had, or even that those of you in the Generation X generation on this phone, on this call, at least you know somebody. They see preachers as con artists, as ripping off the people, health and wealth, prosperity people. They see the church having all these buildings and folks driving in and out. They don't have no spiritual church undergirding that Jesus Christ was a revolutionary, but he was a nonviolent revolutionary who could have used violence. He could have called down an army that the Roman Empire would have been defeated in a split second. They don't realize Jesus was a young revolutionary like them, but he chose different tactics. So I believe that's the disconnection with the young people. And I don't know, y'all, Roy and Pastor, help me. I don't know, because, let me just say this and I'll be done. As I saw the crowds, I thought, if I were to go down there and ask to speak on the microphone and talk about the sense of history and how we did it, I don't think they'd pay no attention to me. They would probably boo me off the stage.
Depends on who's the leader.
It depends on who's the leader. I don't know if they would actually boo you.
And once again, I believe it's the beginning, how you started. If let's just say the protests were coordinated and we agreed that First Institutional was the starting point, and you stood up, then I believe that creates a different environment.
Sure.
We've just got to be strategic in our approach. And the young people are leading what they're leading. Let's not try to even take over what they're doing. Let's organize us. And so those that want to organize together, let them come together and we be strategic and we all build from where we are. I would just say that.
Well, let me just say this quickly, but maybe then, y'all, we need to get a group of us, maybe at the next one or one of them, we need to go down there together and I mean, would it help to just ask them to go to, how can we help you? I mean,
there's another one tonight. There's another one on this coming night. But I want to segue into something because I think it is what you just said, Roy, about being strategic. All of you have alluded to being very strategic. I want to use your statement, Pastor Stewart, in the statement you made yesterday to the press. You said that we are almost at the place to call for professional athletes and all other persons who practice liberty and justice for all to launch a boycott of professional sports in the United States of America until our governmental and law enforcement end this repetitive, racist, deadly assault on African Americans and other people of color. You even alluded to that again in this particular conversation. What would be the tipping point to make that an official call? How many more people have to die?
If I could call LeBron James today.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned it.
I think he is the most popular athlete right now today. If somebody could get to him and he get his colleagues, I believe it needs to start now. But like I said, I have no contact, so I'm at a loss. But I think it needs to stop. I think the turning point was Mr. Floyd's death.
LeBron James.
I think it needs to happen now. Now LeBron wore a T-shirt.
LeBron James made a tweet of the police officer on the neck with Colin Kaepernick next to him, and he said, "Do you understand now, or is it still blurred to you?" I think we probably have more motivation from professional athletes at this juncture than we have had at any other time.
No, talk is cheap. Wearing a T-shirt is not the same. I understand that.
No, I'm not suggesting that they stop there. I think if it was a time to organize them, the time is now. And Pastor Stewart, you keep saying you don't know anybody. You'd be surprised how many pastors you know. These brothers are sitting and sisters are sitting in somebody's church. You got doors. But it's who's going to organize this effort. We often hear great ideas that don't get traction. And that's in general, not just this statement. In general, we hear great ideas that don't get traction. What do we do now? What do we do now?
But I believe this is the level of the work that we can do. We can pool our resources, our intellectual resources, our networking resources, and we strategically develop a strategy to address the issue. I mean, let's just go back to the fact of addressing the issue. And as we talk about asks, I think there's some simple asks that we can do. We need to see the police training. I want us to demand a copy. Show us what you train the police on. And why can't the police use profanity? I'm sorry. Why can the police use profanity to escalate situations? Can you all not hear me? Okay.
We can. We can now. We're just coming in and out.
I mean, there's no job that you can have and that you can cuss out your customers and keep your job. But the police can cuss us out and put their hands on us. The police, the standard should be you as a police officer cannot use profanity.
Pastor, I got
we can make and should make and can change the culture.
I got to go, yo. I got to teach a class. Love you. Bye.
Hey, man. Good to see you.
Love you.
I got to get out of here in a minute myself.
Yeah.
Yes, we're getting ready to wrap this up. But Pastor Stewart, before you close, well, he gone. Did I lose Roy too? Oh, there you are. All right. Last question, because I know I've kept you all a good hour. So we've talked about the police. We've talked about the protests. Last thing is politics. Do you think the statement by the statement by Joe Biden was sufficient for what's going on in the country?
As far as the which statement, because it comes on the heels of a gaffe that he made.
Well, I was going to back into the gaffe. I was going to back into that.
I'm going to go ahead and attack it head on.
Okay.
one of the things that a friend of mine who is just now becoming interested in politics, because he's starting to see after some 20 years of me, prodding him, he's starting to see the importance of it, that it's more just the president that we choose. It's more than just Congress, but we're dealing with judges, we're dealing with policies, we're dealing with local school boards and things of that nature. He said this, he said, Pastor, I don't know if I'm comfortable on the heels of what he said. I don't know if I'm comfortable voting for him on the heels of what he said about Black folks. Yes, that was a great speech that he made, but it comes right after he said that you're not Black if you don't vote for me, right. Or if you question me if you vote for me, you're not Black. I believe that his heart, at the end of it, I believe that his heart is all right, but that goes to show that the political side means that we have to be involved beyond the national Democratic Party or whatever party you choose to be affiliated with. And it's money, it's showing up, it is educating yourself on the issues, on the candidates, and not just voting for someone for name recognition, but really understanding, okay, who is this person? What are their values? And why should I vote for them? Or am I going to vote for them? Okay. And my vote for you is not, and helping people to understand that my vote for you is not guaranteed just because you have a D or an R behind your name.
Anything I do will be to remove the current occupant of the White House out of the White House. That's it. That's the motivation there. That's all I'll say about that.
We feel you. And that's really the bottom line. It is how do we get Trump out of office?
Yeah. And then there's another struggle. I mean, let's just say this. The struggle doesn't stop. I think one thing that we've missed over the last couple of election cycles, the last few election cycles, is we get our presumptive candidate into office and we stop fighting.
Yeah.
We still got to fight, even when our candidate, quote unquote, is successful.
Right. Right. We're all air quoting with our candidate. Well, thank you guys. I appreciate having this time with you. This has been a wonderful conversation. And it sounds like we got some great ideas on how to move forward and how persons who are hearing this can better understand how to protest and what to look for in a real legitimate protest that is geared to make a difference in this community. So Reginald Walton, Roy Tatum, and to Warren Stewart, who has dipped out, thank you all very, very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I hope you have enjoyed the conversation that I have had with Reginald Walton, with Warren Stewart Sr., and with Roy Tatum. Great minds in activism and in community leadership. They gave us a lot to chew on and to understand. And we really know that the fight is not over. It continues. The protests may continue. It's going to take stamina. This road to justice is a marathon and not a sprint. But if we keep running, we will eventually win. I want to pray for you. I want to pray for families who have been impacted by everything that is going on in our country. I want to pray for African Americans and especially our African American men. I want to pray for our police department, for the Department of Public Safety. We don't want to forget. Don't forget the Department of Public Safety had an African American man was killed this past week. Don't forget that. Deon Johnson. Don't forget his name. Don't let him get overlooked in all that we are doing. Let me pray. God, we thank you always for the opportunity that we have to come before your throne of grace. God, we know that you see everything that is going on. And where we may feel powerless, we know you, who is all powerful. You are all knowing and you are everywhere. So we thank you, God. We lift up African American men before you. God, would you keep them safe? Some of our African American men even wear the uniform of the police. We pray especially for them. They are in a tenuous situation. They are both black and they are blue. God, would you be with them? We lift up Chief Jerry Williams to you, who is endeavoring to make a difference in the Phoenix Police Department. We pray for her protection. We pray for her safety. God, I pray angels, warring angels, be around her everywhere she goes, that she may be kept safe. We lift up families who are mourning losses today, inexcusable losses today. God, would you comfort them? And God, I pray for this entire movement for safety, for wisdom and understanding. God, would you help our protests punch a hole into the glass ceiling of justice? I pray for every protester that you would give them wisdom and guidance. For every leader, God, as we move from protests to something that might include a boycott, would you give us wisdom? We recognize that it is the economy. When the economy shifts, governmental figures shift. We've seen that. So God, help us to use the power that we have. Every one of us have power. Help us to use the power that we have. And God, I pray for my white brothers and sisters. God, would you motivate them and move them from a place of comfort to being uncomfortable about what is going on in this world, what is going on in this country, what is going on in their community. God, let them not sit by silent. Let them be more than a videographer, but help them to move, to be on the picket line with us, stand with us, shoulder to shoulder, to make a difference. When we start calling for a boycott, may they too withhold their dollars, that we can be a united front. So we thank you in advance for what you are going to do. I pray that you are moving everyone under the sound of my voice to figure out what they can do to make a difference. I thank you, God, and I bless you and I praise you. It is in the name of Jesus Christ that I pray. Amen. God bless you, and may you continue to not just survive, but thrive. See you next week.